Well, hi everyone. This was a weird night. I had back-to-back presentations. I just got back from a user group in Arizona that finished at 7, and now we're doing this. So that was on a completely different topic. So I feel very popular or something. I don't know. Anyway, it's been a while since I've been with you. I remember the good old days when I used to be able to see you in person. I miss those days, but it's nice to see you virtually anyway. So thank you for being here. And I've I've written a lot of books about a lot of topics. The one we're going to talk about tonight, I have never ever had so many requests for this presentation. And I don't know, maybe it's just that with the pandemic, everybody has death on their minds. But I just want to say, of all the presentations you hear about death, this one, the one that we're about to do right now, is going to be your favorite. You're going to love it. So, everybody ready to talk about the end? I'll take that as an enthusiastic yes. All right. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Joe Kissell. I used to write books for a living. I do still write books, but now I'm also a publisher. I run Take Control Books. We have books on all kinds of Apple and non-Apple topics. Anything you need to know about how to use your Mac, iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, or other gadgets, we've got the information you need. I hope you will come to our store and buy lots of books and take advantage of that. Okay. So, we are going to talk about one of those many books called Take Control of Your Digital Legacy. And away we go. Well, there we go. So, here's what the book looks like. It's blue. I love this billboard. There was a moment in my life when I could have used this. This could have been my entire will. I could have easily fill in those 4 or 5 blanks. Um, So, as I talk at user groups across the country, I tend to see a lot of gray hairs, even grayer than mine. We are of a certain age, and I get a lot of questions about, what happens to my digital data afterwards. What happened? Great, I have backups, but how do I leave my backups to my kids? I use a password manager for all my passwords. That's great. What if my spouse needs access to my passwords after I die? I keep getting questions like this, so I wrote a book about it. Now, a word about myself. I my on my mom's side of the family, they're like into genealogy, and we have like extensive records going back many generations. We have all the photos and we have all the stories and all the artifacts. On my dad's side of the family, they just don't think about that stuff at all. So my grandfather, my dad's dad, died a few months before I was born. So obviously I never met him. I've seen a few pictures of him. I've heard a couple of stories. That's it. Like I've never seen a video, like a movie of him. I've never heard a recording of his voice. I don't know if he had a sense of humor. I don't know, like, was he a kind person? Was he a strict person? Could he sing? Like, I don't know anything about this guy. His father, my great grandfather, one Martin Kissell, I tried to extract information about him from other family members, and nobody seems to know anything. I know where he's buried and when he died. I'm not sure what country he was born in. I don't know if he even spoke English. Um, I know almost nothing about this guy, and I wish I did. I wish I knew not just like genealogical facts, that's interesting, but I wish I knew like what kind of people did I come from? Were these fun people? Were they interesting people? Were they, miscreants? I don't know. I wish I knew. I wish I knew about my ancestors. Now, compared to that complete lack of information I have about my past or my family's past, on the computer that I'm standing in front of here, I've got like 4 million files. I have hundreds of hours of audio and video recordings of myself. I have tens of thousands of photographs. I have thousands of pages of stuff that I've written. I have gigabytes upon gigabytes of email messages. I got so much data that if my kids or hypothetical future grandkids or great grandkids wanted to know anything about me, boy, there's lots of data, lots and lots of data. They will not run into the problem that I'm running into with my grandfather and great grandfather. They will be able to see, oh, well, yeah, he really thought he could tell a joke. I noticed that about him. They might not like me. They might not think I was interesting or funny or smart, but they'll be able to know how good was his French pronunciation. They can find out. There's records of this, but the catch is just the fact that I have this data here in front of me does not mean it's automatically going to last years, decades, or centuries into the future. In order to make sure that it is passed along in the form that it needs to be, and that it persists long enough for my descendants to care and do anything with it, I've got to take some steps. So that's what we're talking about. What we're talking about is you, while you are still alive and healthy, and you've got all this data about yourself that might be interesting in the future, making decisions about what you keep, what you throw away, what form you preserve it in, and how that is preserved in the future. So, of course, yeah. We're talking about your legacy, the distant future, generations hence, and all that. That's true. But it's not just that. It's also like, if you get hit by a bus or a virus and you expire suddenly in the very near future, your family, your loved ones are going to be very unhappy. At least I hope that they love you enough to be very unhappy about that. And they're going to be grieving, and people are going to be saying, well, we got to make funeral arrangements, and we got to deal with life insurance, and we got to do, take care of all these, we got to have an obituary, and they're going to be put under a lot of stress. Well, the same sorts of planning we do for the long distant future can also help in the immediate aftermath of your death, even if it's unexpected, because the same sorts of information you're packaging up would be useful there too. And in fact, even if, I'm predicting possibly as early as late this calendar year, we might all be able to go on vacation again. Hey, I'm going to head off to parts unknown for a month. You might need a house sitter, or you might be in the hospital. You might have some reason to be away from things for a while, and somebody else has to take care of business. This will help with that as well. Now, as I said, just the fact that I have this computer here with all this stuff on it isn't a guarantee that it'll last into the future. Why not? Well, first reason is encryption. Of course, I have File Vault turned on. Of course, I use passcodes and everything. Of course, I've got strong passwords. I'm a big believer in encryption and privacy, but hey, it's a double-edged sword, okay? It helps me now to keep things private, but that very same encryption could keep my wife or my kids from accessing all this beautiful data about me that they might want to know about after I'm dead or 20 or 50 years in the future. So we got to deal with that. And then there's file formats. Every once in a while, when I speak to a Mac user group, I encounter people who back in the day used to use AppleWorks, ClarisWorks. I see some people nodding. Yeah, and a lot of those people are still kind of bitter. They're kind of bitter. Yeah, I invested a lot of time and effort into that ClarisWorks database or whatever. For a while you could buy software that would translate that stuff into some useful modern file format. Nowadays, it's hard to even convert AppleWorks or ClarisWorks files into anything that you can use for anything else. I'm sorry to say that just happens. This is a fact of technology. that wasn't the first or the last time that that particular thing happens. It will happen again. We might all think we're very secure and comfortable with our docs and our JPEGs and our whatever, but a lot can happen in 100 years. We don't really know that those sorts of things will still be readable in the future. And then there's hardware. Hey, you found an old like Mac Plus in your attic. I forgot about that. That's cool. I wonder if it still boots. It might. It might not. Oh, you got a box of old floppies that are 30 years old or something. Um, those might be readable, they might not. Time and heat and humidity and dryness and, you know, all these things take their toll on computers and all kinds of machines and all kinds of physical media. And that's going to keep being true. So will this stuff even last into the future? And then there's those 4 million files on my newly, obsolete iMac Pro. Thanks, Apple. I know what I have and where it is. So when I need to find it, I can go to the right folder. But other people don't know what I have. So Apple's way of looking at this is, well, hey, you've got Spotlight. Spotlight is amazing. It's perfect. It's easy. You type in what you're looking for, and it'll search through the contents of all your files and just magically show you what you want. All right, so let's pretend that that were true, because we all know it isn't. Let's pretend that Apple was telling the truth about Spotlight and it really was very reliable. That wouldn't help if I didn't know what to look for. So maybe I've written the great American novel. Spoiler, I have not yet written the great American novel. And nobody knows that I have. So I'm not going to call it the great American novel .docx. It's going to be whatever it's called. So, years after I'm gone, when somebody's looking through my Mac for anything of interest, they're not going to know that it's there. They're not going to know what to look for. And so they'll never find the great American novel. So you need to do some organizational stuff to make it clear to other people what you have, what's interesting to them, and where to find it. How do we do this? Well, let's take an inventory. Now look, I am not going to write down 4 million files and what is in every single one of them. That's just nutso. What I do want to do is to make a high-level description with broad categories, all right? Something that's actually going to be useful. I'm going to put this information in a document that I will call a digital will. As I mentioned earlier, you buy the book, you can get a template that is sort of pre-written, you just fill in the blanks. But it's a document that will go along with your conventional will that will tell people once you're gone how your digital assets should be disposed of. Now, in this inventory, which is one of the elements of your digital will, some of the things you will list is your online accounts. Do you have a Dropbox account, a Facebook account, an Apple ID, blah, 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 blah. You don't need to list them all. List the interesting ones, the important ones, the ones that anybody would actually care about. There might be a dozen, there might be fewer. They're not going to be 100. Media, by which I might mean a physical CD or DVD. I might mean digital media that you purchase from Apple. Stuff like that. Again, broad categories. I don't want to know that, like the name of every episode of Jessica Jones that you bought. Like, just say, I got a bunch of TV shows, Software, again, nobody cares that you have Microsoft Word, but people might care if you have some special, rare, or expensive app that is needed to be able to read some of your important files, or you have a license for something expensive and important that you want to pass on to a spouse or a child. That you should inventory. And you should also inventory, again, at a high level, your other personal data. Other is a pretty big word that encompasses a lot of things. In a little bit, I'll tell you what some of those categories are. It's big, but it's also the most important, because other is where your photos go. Other is where your email, your email archives go. Other is where all those letters you've written and art you've created, all that stuff goes. So we'll talk about that. So you have started in, you have your template, you've started listing like your biggest categories and the most important things in these categories. It's all spelled out in the template, of course. Now you have to make some decisions before you get into too much detail filling out your digital will. You have to decide what kinds of things you want to keep, what kinds of things you don't want to keep. Now, as I've talked about this with many user groups, I have encountered people that are like, you know what? I really don't care. My computer can be thrown in the trash when I'm dead, and I don't care about literally any information on it. That's one kind of response. Another kind of response is, how do I make sure that my wife doesn't see my porn when I'm dead? Um, this was actually asked in a live meeting, so that was fun. And then there are people who are like, well, I want to make sure that every last email message and contact and whatever is preserved for all eternity. Now, I come from a line of pack rats. When my parents were getting kind of old and they were about to move from a larger home into a smaller home, my mom and dad had a little disagreement. The topic of the disagreement was how many sledgehammers does an average American family need? This was, mind you, at a time when my dad was no longer capable of lifting a sledgehammer. My mom's opinion was that the number was somewhat less than one, and my father's opinion was that it was greater than one. But anyway, that's the sort of thing I have to contend with, is I have a tendency to just save everything, especially when it comes to digital files that don't seem to take up any space. Um, I have to fight that back a little bit, because if I save literally everything, then there's too much noise and not enough signal. You might have the opposite problem, or you might be somewhere in between. Biggest choice you're going to have to make is who will be your digital executor. Now, of course, your regular will have an executor. This is the person who reads your will and says, okay, well, he or she wanted to leave all of this stuff to this person. Well, after we pay the taxes, and there isn't that much left, but this goes to, they do the best they can to distribute your assets according to your wishes. So you need somebody to do that with your digital stuff too. This has to be a tech savvy person. This person might be dealing with weird file formats and media and passwords and all kinds of stuff. So if your regular executor is technically savvy, they are the perfect person to do this too. Just add this onto their job description. That'll make everything way easier. But if your regular executor is not technically savvy, they're going to have to team up with somebody who is, to make sure all the data gets to the right places. And of course, it's a little more challenging with data, because it's not just like, well, there's a car and there's only one of it, so somebody's going to get the keys. Yeah, well, your photos could go to 100 different people, and that makes it a little more challenging. You're going to have to make some decisions about what file formats you're going to try to preserve your stuff in. I did some research to find out what historians and museum curators and archivists think about different digital file formats and how likely they are to still be readable in the distant future. And I learned some sort of disturbing things, like they say you should avoid compression. Wow, that kind of sucks when it comes to pictures, because the archivists say that the best format for longevity for photographs is uncompressed TIFFs. Well, uncompressed TIFFs are gigantic. They're not like PNGs or JPEGs or HE whatever. They're huge. But you have to make those decisions. Do I want the best shot at longevity, or do I want something that's more manageable and let my kids or my grandkids figure it out later on? So you're going to make some high-level decisions that will inform the rest of the choices you make. Now, a little just parentheses here. We're talking about digital data, right? We're talking about your digital photos and your email, digital accounts, digital files. I feel like, as long as you're doing that, as long as we're figuring out how to preserve this stuff, if you still have one of these things, which I do, it's not a box, it's an envelope, but it has a lot of old photographs in it. If you still have old physical photographs or documents that you've never scanned, I think it's a really good idea to go ahead and scan them. and add them to your digital cache that you are going to be preserving for the future. It's important to preserve these things in their physical forms too, but hey, you know, photographs will only get more yellow and more brittle with time. They're they can be damaged by fire and water and whatever. So just as a backup, as another way of carrying that information forward, you got any old documents that you want to preserve? Let's add those to your cache. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about this here tonight because we don't have a lot of time. I do go into detail about it in the book. One thing I do want to say is that if you have a scanner or you don't mind going and buying a scanner and you've got some time on your hands, you can scan them all yourself. That's fine. If you find that that's a just really mind-numbingly tedious thing that you don't want to do, and or you don't have the equipment, or you don't have the time, or you don't have the skill, there are various ways of outsourcing scanning. And now one way to do it is to find a son, daughter, grandchild, niece, nephew, neighbor, somebody, or we're talking somebody that can be bribed with cookies, basically, and say, hey, would you help your old out and use your advanced young person technical skills to scan some photos for me? And they might say yes. If not, you can find a company that'll do it for you. There are a bunch of companies, I list them in the book, where they'll you send them a box and they'll scan your stuff and they'll give you a web page with little thumbnails, and then you say, okay, for every one you want to actually keep, you pay however much per image, and then we'll send you like the really nice high-res versions of them. For an additional fee, we'll do some retouching for you, color correction, all those sorts of things. It could get expensive depending on how many pictures you have, but it's also very, very easy. Now, one thing you're going to encounter, whether you do this yourself or whether somebody else does it for you, is what do you call all these photos? Because you pop a photo onto a scanner, it's going to say, well, this is now img 00001.pdf, or it's, you know, it's going to put like the date and time in there. It's not going to give it a useful name. And if you try to give each one of your photos a manual useful name, you could go crazy. That's gonna be a long, tedious job. So a friend of mine who is a programmer by trade, very smart guy, and also was sort of appointed his extended family's photo archivist. He has scanned tens of thousands of photos on behalf of his family. I asked him, what do you do about naming your files? Do you have like some fancy database that you cooked up, or do you like use, you know, all kinds of tags and organizational features in Lightroom or Photos or something? I was like, no. Here's what I do. I open a plain text document in BB Edit. I scan something. Whatever name the scanner gives me, I just paste that in. Tab. What's in the photo? I just type it out. Well, that's Aunt Ethel. Looks like Florida, late 60s, with her Cadillac. You just type whatever you see. If you know who's in it, if you know where it is, if you know when it was, or you can make an educated guess, you just type that in. Anything written on the back, photographer stamp, date, notes, whatever, type that in, press return, repeat. Now, it's not really a database, but what's cool about your plain text file is you never had to spend any time tagging, never had to spend any time on naming. You just take whatever name you get. A year from now or 100 years from now, if somebody wants to search, they can just like open up that file, Command F, Aunt Ethel, and oh, well, Aunt Ethel is in fact in img 0001 blah 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 dot PDF. And then they can find that. So it's low tech. It's also easy, and it's future-proof and low stress. So that's one way you can do it. I do think though that you should keep the originals if you can, because I know I love to be able to handle and smell and, you know, look at artifacts from the past. I think that's really cool. So I mentioned earlier, passwords are kind of a big deal. They are. I have well over 1,000 different passwords. I like to make them long and random and unique. That's good for security and privacy, but I have to make sure that somebody else is going to be able to deal with them when the time comes. So first recommendation, if you are not already using a password manager, boy, please get with the program. You got to use a password manager. Don't use the same password everywhere. Oh, that is so wrong. It is so dangerous to your privacy and security. Don't write passwords down in a book because that's just, it's, it, life is too short. You should not have to ever spend time thinking about creating passwords or spend time filling them in. Use a password manager. Let your computer do all the hard work for you. I like 1Password. Some people like LastPass or RoboForm, or like there's a zillion of them, Dashlane. And I have my preferences, but use whatever you like. Use something that will create the passwords for you and save them for you and fill them in for you. And what you get out of this for our purposes tonight is they're all in one place. So you'll have a master password that unlocks that whole vault of all the rest of them. All you got to do to give somebody else your passwords is give them the master password and a copy of the vault. You don't have to give them 1,000 different passwords. You don't have to worry about it. Just give them access to your vault. If you have a lot of passwords like I do, just as we did earlier with like social media accounts and online accounts, you want to say, well, okay, these are the ones that I've tagged or I put in a certain folder or I put a little note on. These are the ones that are most important and most relevant, the accounts that you'll actually need to worry about. Of course, you do want to make sure that that master password and how to get at your password vault is mentioned in your digital wills so that your digital executor can take control of that. Next category, email. I love email. I love the fact that in my email archives, I can see where I was, what I was doing, who I was talking to, what I was thinking, what I purchased, everywhere I traveled for the last however many decades. That's a treasure trove of information. I love having it. There is a lot of noise there, a lot of useless stuff too, but there's a lot of gold in there. But also, there are some steps you have to take to make sure that the right things happen with your email. One of those steps is making sure you actually have a local copy of all your saved email messages. Now, I'm in my mid-50s, but I have some friends who are quite a bit younger than me. Those pesky kids, and people of a younger generation than me are much more likely to have never used an actual email client like Apple Mail or Thunderbird or Outlook or whatever, one of those. I have friends whose sole lifelong experience of email has been in a browser. Well, they use Gmail or they use Hotmail or they use Yahoo or whatever. Why would I use anything other than a web browser for my email? I don't have to download anything. It's just there. I got my web browser open all the time. Isn't that great? Well, okay, that's not how I roll, but if that makes you happy, whatever. The thing is, though, you can't know that whatever cloud provider you use for email will still be around, decades after you're gone. If you want to preserve your email, you're going to have to make sure that you have local copies of this stuff. You've exported, downloaded. Now, if you already use POP or IMAP, you're probably good. You have a local copy. But if you experience email only on the web, you're going to have to take some extra steps to make sure that you do. As always, give your digital executor access. So they're going to want not only like your stored messages, although they do want that, but you're also going to want to give them access to your accounts, your login, your password, the server information, how they can get into your accounts. Because once you're gone, they might need to set up, for example, a permanently out of the office message. They might, you might still be getting important emails from people that don't know that you're gone. And somebody's going to have to answer them and say, yeah, unfortunately, yeah, Fred won't be paying that bill because he's dead. So they will need to you will need to give them access to the live accounts as well as the archived email, and then tell them what you want to do. Do you want to just shut down all these email accounts? Do you want to have an automatic reply for a certain period of time? What do you want that automatic reply to say? Should certain people be notified by email? Those kinds of things. Then there's social media. Now, I use Twitter, not a lot. I don't post a lot. I read a lot. I don't post a lot. Um, I'm like, I have an account, but I'm not like super into it. Facebook, like, I don't get along with Facebook. I don't have great feelings about Facebook. That might be its own whole book in the future, like how to stop using Facebook. But anyway, I don't like it, and I don't use it very much. Um, my mother, on the other hand, who's in her mid 80s, loves Facebook. She's all over Facebook. This is one of her primary ways of keeping in touch with family members. That's where she goes to post stuff and hear stories and see pictures and find out about all the relatives and their grandkids and all this kind of thing. So we all have different relationships with social media, which might range from not using it at all or actively, despising it, to being really super into it. The more into it you are, the more you're going to have to take steps to make sure that the right things happen with your social media. So you're going to want to make a list. My list will be pretty short. Well, I got my hardly ever used Facebook account and my Twitter account. I have an Instagram account that I've literally never posted anything to. I have a LinkedIn account which can be nuked from space, and I would never care even if it happened tomorrow. That's me. Your mileage might differ. You're going to decide what to do with each account. And when I say decide what to do, here are some examples. You might say, well, when I'm gone, hey, Executor, would you please post these final words from me? It can be funny, it can be heartfelt, it can be matter of fact, but you might want somebody to either post your own words or post their own words to say, unfortunately, so-and-so is no longer with us. Please contribute to whatever in their honor. Obviously, you will not be getting any replies here. That's one way to do it. You might decide that you want your executor to archive all the stuff that's online for posterity. Now, that can be done in two ways. One thing is they can go to Facebook or Twitter or wherever and actually download all of the stuff you've ever posted and keep local copies of it so that it's under your control and can be preserved as you want. Some social media providers, including Facebook, have an online archiving method where you can say, look, we're going to basically freeze this account, but preserve it for as long as Facebook stays in business. You can have somebody delete your accounts. I have a saying, might be familiar to you. What happens on the internet stays on the internet. So I have known of people who have attempted to delete Facebook accounts or other things, and they didn't end up getting deleted, or there were still copies. So you can't count on somebody deleting an account and having all that information disappear from the internet forever, but you can ask. If you happen to run a social media account for, let's say, a user group or a club or a church or what have you, where it's not just about you, it's about the organization, you want to make sure that you've handed that off to somebody else, that somebody else has instructions for how to take over that account. Well, now we come to that big, big other category that I mentioned. What about all the other stuff? Well, let's say a few words about that. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine okay, so I have a friend, I was a married couple, and the guy had cancer. Okay, he had terminal cancer. We all knew long in advance that he was going to die. And everybody had kind of made their peace with it. His wife was, preparing for it, and before he died, she came to me and said, "Hey, Joe, my husband bought so many movies and TV shows and albums from the iTunes store. I just wanted to check with you and see, I just want to make sure, like, after he's dead, I'll still be able to access all those, right? And I was like, not necessarily. I'm really sorry, but it doesn't work like that because, when you buy media from Apple and most other online places, you don't really buy it, you license it. And the particular human being who buys it licenses it. You don't license it to be able to give it away to anyone you want. It's for you personally. So once you're dead and Apple or whoever figures that out, um, they could just shut down your account, or they could block anyone from accessing that media, even if they have your credentials. They might not, or they might not for a really long time, but they could because that's what you signed up for when you bought it. So anything that is protected with copy protection, with digital rights management, it's really, really hard to pass on. Now, I will say two things. Number one, we, Take Control Books, don't do that. We don't copy protect our stuff. It's not that we trust you because we think that you are really completely untrustworthy. No, we don't want to make your life harder. It's a pain. We don't want to make your life more awkward than it has to be. Now, in my travels, I have discovered that some people say that there are methods, these occult rituals that a person who is sufficiently motivated and equipped could perform that supposedly remove digital rights management from files so that anybody could use them. Now, of course, being a law-abiding citizen, I would never do that, and I would certainly never tell anybody else how to do it. But I have heard that anyone with a search engine and a brain could figure it out in a matter of seconds. So if you were a scofflaw and so inclined, that might be a thing that you would do. So I'm just saying. Same goes for software. Some software licenses can be passed on to other people. Sometimes it can't, but you want to make sure that you have a plan for any software that is important for reading your special files. What about other stuff in the cloud? Do you have, iCloud data, Dropbox, Box, OneDrive, Google Drive, Google Docs, all the things, all the cloud stuff? You need to specify what you have that is of importance and interest and what should be done with it. Now, usually the answer is if something is in the cloud, it needs to get sucked down out of the cloud and put onto local media and then just close that account. That is usually what you want to have done with it. Sometimes you really don't care about the account and it can just be closed without all that extra steps, but you need to put down your expectations of what will happen. Same thing goes for your local data. Do you have still physical media? Do you have external hard drives? Do you have backup drives? Write down what is on it and what should happen to it. Of course, true of backups too, whether they're local backups or backups in the cloud, they are super important and super valuable. What do you have? Where is it? Is it encrypted? How do I get at it? How do I read this stuff? Put this all in your digital will. Now, after you've gone through, you've filled out the template, you've said, okay, here is the stuff that I have, my digital assets, here's what they are. I have a list, it's categorized. Then what do? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to take all of those files, those saved emails, your photos, your movies, your whatever it is, all that digital data, and you're going to create an archive. But how can you store that archive? I want that archive to be readable in 5 years and 10 years and 50 years and maybe in 100 years. So how do I store it? That's a hard question because we don't know what technology is going to look like in future decades. So here's my advice. Number one, don't choose just one medium, choose more than one. Here are some options. There are stores out there that will sell what they call archival quality optical discs, recordable CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays. Instead of just having a dye on them, these have like gold or silver or something that is not going to fade. And these companies say, hey, this will store your data for 100 years. And I say, well, that's great. You, the company making these, won't be around in 100 years for me to make good on my warranty. So it's easy for you to say. Will anybody actually be able to find a functioning CD-ROM drive in 100 years? Like, probably not. That could be a real challenge. So I'm not super jazzed about that. It's not very future-proof. Well, of course, there are hard drives and SSDs. These are plentiful. I mean, here's I was about to show it to you. It's connected to my computer. You know, here's a Thunderbolt 3 SSD that I use for backups of my new M1 MacBook Air. And I've got these little, well, again, that's probably connected to something. Anyway, I got these little hard drives all over the place that I use for backups and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, they store a lot of data. They're compact. They're cheap. Will they still be readable decades from now? I wouldn't really count on it. You know, if I were putting something on a hard drive, I would probably want somebody to transfer that stuff to a new hard drive every few years because I've had way too many hard drives fail. I would at least want somebody to plug it into a computer and check it, you know, like spin it up so that the hard drive doesn't seize. Same thing goes for SSDs. You know, they're flash. They don't need to have electricity applied to them all the time. But but SSDs can lose data if they go for years without being connected to electricity. True. So if you choose one of these, you have to make sure that somebody cares for it. That plug it in, check it from time to time, transfer it to new media. What about cloud storage? Isn't that better because then somebody else can worry about all the hardware and the backups and the maintenance and stuff? That's true, but also if you have any significant quantity of data, somebody else is going to have to pay for that stuff to stay in the cloud for years and decades. Who will that be and how will they pay for it? And what happens if that big company that seemed completely unstoppable at one point in time eventually does go out of business? I don't know that I'd want to count on that necessarily. Well, of course, you can print everything out, right? Because we know how to preserve paper. We got, you know, books that are many hundreds of years old in museums and libraries, so we can preserve paper. You can print stuff out if you want to. It's real hassle, and you can't really, it's not going to work for movies, right? It's not going to work for software. There's some things you can't really print out, but some of your stuff you certainly could print out, and that could be one of your media. Now, if you really want the ultimate, so there's this company that makes these sapphire discs they call nanoform. So they take a sapphire wafer. They come in different sizes from like 1 inch to 8 inches or something. And they use a laser to etch stuff on it. So it's like laser printer, only they're literally etching into the sapphire. They're etching super small. Instead of like printing at 12 points, they print it, you know, a 12th of a point or something. So they will, you know, a single disk can store hundreds, maybe thousands of very small pages of information. Then they take a second sapphire disk and they fuse it to the top. Now you have, because like sapphire, that's what is used on the very most expensive Apple watches, right? Because it's scratch proof, it's unbreakable. It's impervious to magnetic fields. It's waterproof. You can drop it in molten lava and it'll still be fine. Best of all, you don't need to have a computer in order to read it. All you need is a magnifying glass. They're going to have magnifying glasses in the future, no problem. So that's great. Little proviso there. They do cost like $1,000 plus each. So they're not cheap. And they might be impervious to magnetic fields, but they're not impervious to being misplaced. And the same thing that goes for paper goes for these things. They're not good for anything that has to be preserved in a digital format like a movie. So what I'm saying is you have a lot of choices and they're all differently bad. None of them are perfect. And that's why you need to choose more than one. And you need to request that future generations do some maintenance on this data and transfer it to new media as it becomes available that's going to have a longer lifespan. So you've picked your one or two or more media and you copy all your stuff onto you. Copy your photos, copy your email, copy it onto that. Okay, so that's done. You're going to want to obviously store it in a cool, dry place. It could be a safe deposit box. It could be, a media safe, like a safe that's rated for media. I have one down here. I can't, it's heavy, so I'm not going to pick it up and show it to you, but it's designed for media so that if there were a fire, it would, all the stuff in it would be protected. It wouldn't melt. It would be fine. Now, what I'm suggesting, in addition to having one or more copies, as I've just described, is you use the most powerful tool known to humanity right now for preserving data, or really for doing anything, and that is guilt. So you go to your son, daughter, grandchild, niece, nephew, and you have to use these words. It's very important. You have to be very serious, and you say, "How much do you love me?" And you have to wait for them to respond, because they're they're already stuck. They're not going to say, well, I would say maybe 6 on a scale of 10, not enough to do a major favor for you. I'm definitely not going to give you a kidney. But like, they're not going to say that. If you have a loved one, you say, how much do you love me? They're going to say, so much, this much. Well, do you love me enough to donate just a little corner of your computer's storage to hold a copy of my archive, just a mere 50 gigabytes, no more? Now, if your person loves you enough and has enough space on their device for however big your library is without interfering with their lifestyle, I'll probably say yes. Now, what's great about that is that as they move from device to device, your data will move along with their data. As they back up their device to the cloud, your data will get backed up with it. And so you have your data being kept alive by a live caretaker, and that gives you extra insurance. Now, assuming you don't die tomorrow or next week or next year, you're going to want to go back in from time to time and refresh your archives with new stuff that you've downloaded or found or created. So you do want to plan for that. And you also want to make sure that whatever hardware you are currently using, your iPad, your iPhone, your Mac, whatever, that someone can actually take care of that stuff too, because that will be the very easiest and most convenient way to get at your stuff. So you just make a folder and put all this stuff in it. Put your conventional will, copy of that, a copy of your digital will, which you will print out. Some instructions for like, what are all the things in this box or this envelope, and what do I do with them? A copy of your data archive in whatever form you have chosen to store it in. And what I call how to be me. So this is like, if there's anything that you do from time to time in your home or your business, and the instructions for doing this thing aren't written down, you just know it. It's just in your head. Like, well, every 5,000 miles, this thing has to be done in the car, or every spring before this happens, we got to do this thing with the gutters, or every, whatever. There's stuff you got to do around your house or with your business that you're the only person that knows it. Write down how to be you, how to do those things so that somebody else can take over them. Last but not least, the other thing that needs to go in your archive, in your dossier before you squirrel it away someplace safe, is I'm going to suggest that you write your own obituary. That's called an autobituary, like an autobiography plus obituary. I have read some autobituaries that other people have written for themselves, and they are hilarious. Now, you might choose not to be funny, but the point is, I've had a bunch of relatives die recently, and I read their obituaries, and I'm like, that doesn't sound like Aunt Gail at all. That doesn't sound like Uncle Bill. Like, they're boring. They're boilerplate. They're like, well, so and so went to this college and got married here and lived there and had this job. Like it's boring stuff that nobody cares about, and it never reflects the way that person really was, or what they were like, or what was interesting about them. But if you write your own obituary, you can put all that stuff in it, and you should. You just say, hey, executor, you're going to want to fill in the date of death, cause of death, but the rest, just publish this. Okay, this is what I want to have said about myself. So that's what we're doing. We're going to create a digital will with an inventory of our stuff and our statements about what we want to have happen to all these things. And create an archive that is a representation of all of our digital data, and leave instructions for how that should be cared for in the future. This book gives you all the gory details. It's going to be updated. There's going to be a new edition in, I don't know, I hope like a few months-ish. If you were to buy it now, you would almost certainly get the new edition for free. And even if it weren't free, it would come at a big discount. I would strongly recommend that you take advantage of this. Well, it has been a pleasure being with you again. I thank you for your kind attention. And let's do this again sometime.